From affordable housing projects to rises in city bus fares, we catch up with what's happening at the Honolulu City Council.
Honolulu City Council Chair Tommy Waters joins us live along with a member of the Honolulu City Charter Commission. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suchi and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, Lohan, thanks for tuning in on this wet and windy Tuesday. We hope you are all staying dry and safe out there. Thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Now. As we mentioned, we're going to catch up with Chair Tommy Waters in just a few moments, but we always like to invite those of you who are watching both on air and online to engage in the conversation. You can send over your questions here, email them to us at spotlightnow@hawaiinewsnow.com, or you can also head over to Facebook and enter your questions there as well.
And we're fielding those questions now, thanks to those of you who have already started to email our first guest, and that is Honolulu City Council Chair Tommy Waters. Chair, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Good to see you. A pretty wet weekend, but we all made it through.
Yeah, I hope everybody's safe, staying dry, and staying home where possible.
Yeah, let's dive into some of those issues. And we really want to talk about housing to a large extent this morning or this afternoon. But first, let's start off with those bus fares, because they were fairly controversial. A lot of people feeling like Honolulu residents are squeezed already, and to raise the buses kind of hurts those who can least afford it. Why did this have to be done?
Well, it was a tough vote. It passed 6-3. 3 council members voted no, and I get exactly why they voted no. But the fact of the matter is that the Department of Transportation Services told us that if we don't raise the fees, they're going to cut services. And I know for a fact that people rely on the bus to get to work, rely on the bus to get to school. And if their route was canceled, and that's what they told us they were going to have to do, cancel routes. If their route was canceled, how are these people going to get to school? So it came down to raising the fees slightly or canceling routes. And I put it back on you and everybody else. What would you do if you were in my shoes? That was a tough call.
Yeah, and we know that these routes, as you said, are vital. Is this enough? Because as you mentioned, there is an increase, which people weren't happy about, but it was not as big as it could have been. So do you foresee having to raise rates again in the future?
Well, hopefully not. I'm looking at other ways to generate revenue so we don't have to raise fees, such as more advertising on the bus and handy van, allowing people to advertise at bus stops. Other cities do it. Outdoor Circle isn't going to be happy about that. But certainly, if we're looking at how to generate revenue, we got to think out of the box and think outside of what we're currently doing. By the way, I do want to point out that we didn't raise the rates for seniors and folks with disabilities. That was, for a lot of us on the council, a bottom line. We couldn't do that. As originally proposed, it did raise rates across the board for everybody. So what we ended up doing is coming up with a compromise, basically, and that was big. No increase for seniors and no increase for disabled folks. Really, the people who are going to be paying the higher rate are people who pay cash. Who pays the cash? Our visitors, right? They don't use the Holo card. If you use the Holo card, the increase isn't going to be that much.
Okay. Let me ask you about the Outdoor Circle and what you just mentioned, because I do think when people hear advertising on buses, red flags are going up. How significant would you allow that to be?
Well, that's up for debate. At the very minimum, the Department of Transportation Services should be pushing more advertising inside the bus, right? If you ride the bus now, there's few and far between, right? So they should be doing more of that. The question is, do we want to put it on the outside of the bus or at the bus stops? Honestly, I don't know, but it's worth discussing. And really, I want to know how much revenue that will actually generate. Because if we're only going to generate $10, not worth it. But if we can generate $5 million, of course, it might be worth it. And then maybe we could make bus free, which ultimately I would love to see, right? Make the train and the bus for free. But, we have 1,200 bus drivers. I think we have, let's see, I have my notes here, how many routes we actually have, right? 4,200 bus stops, over 500 buses, and 100 plus bus routes. How do you pay for that? You got to pay for it some way.
Let's also talk about what that would mean for Skyline. I mean, could you potentially see this also being integrated in Skyline? And also, if you're just overall your thoughts on how things are being managed there, as we now have, are a few months now, more than a few months into, phase 2 being opened up. How do you see that going? And do you see a model where this could also be integrated into Skyline?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Absolutely. We want it in Skyline as well. Advertisement in the train and at the train stations would be great. Why don't we, provide a place for businesses to sell their wares at the train station? You go to Japan, that's all over the place, right? You got shopping centers around bus stations and train stations. We really should be doing that as well.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of questions about housing, so
Yes.
we've got to move to that.
Please.
Bill 7, for folks who aren't familiar, this is a bill that was passed to try to increase low and moderate housing to give developers some incentive to actually build these units. These are basically smaller walk-ups and low-scale units. There's a lot of talk about amending Bill 7, changing it. We have a question here from Ben. Mahalo, Chair Waters, for all of your efforts to help add housing. I'm a constituent. I support building housing. Bill 7 seems like one of the ways affordable housing is just starting to show results. Now there's talk about weakening and rolling it back. Why is now the right or wrong time for that?
Great question, Ben, and thank you for tuning in. I do want to point out that affordable housing is probably the most important issue that the city's facing. You folks have heard me say this a number of times. I'm the fifth of 6 kids. All my siblings live on the mainland. I'm the only one left here. Both my parents, my dad was born and raised in Kalihi, moved to the mainland, ended up passing away on the mainland. So I'm deathly afraid that we don't have enough housing for our young people. So far, the council has approved well over 10,000 units, of which about 8,000 of them are affordable. So we take this very, very seriously. As far as Bill 7 is concerned, it's kind of the mayor's baby too, right? So the council is being very, very sensitive to that. But what Bill 7 allows for, you have zoning, right? There's height restrictions. Bill 7 allows you to go above that, number one. You don't have to have a setback. You can build all the way to the property line. You don't have to provide parking. You don't have to provide an elevator. You don't have to do any of these park dedications or open space dedications. And get this, you don't even have to pay property taxes for 10 years. That's how much the council wants these things to work. What's happening, though, is these buildings are being built in 1 or 2 council districts, and the people are complaining to those council members. By the way, I didn't introduce Bill 17, which would basically end these Bill 7 subsidies in the next few years. But what's happening is, since there's no parking, where are the people who live in that building parking?
On the street.
On the street. So if you had your parking stall in front of your house for years and all of a sudden it's taken and you can never park there again because it's always too busy, that's what's happening. People are upset. So it's a balancing act. I honestly, I don't think the votes are there to actually kill the Bill 7 projects. But I think we can tweak it a little bit. Maybe have them provide some off-street parking in these buildings, right? But again, there's so many incentives out there. I got Bill 11, by the way, to ask the Department of Housing and Land Management to look at all the incentives out there and figure out what's working. What's working? Because as I mentioned, in some cases, actually in Bill 7 cases, we actually give cash to the developer. There's post construction grants. I think it's about $9,000 per unit. Bill 4, which is on the table, would allow for $6,500, I believe, per unit. Oh, excuse me, $62,500 per unit. But where's that money going to come from? That's what we got to debate and figure out. I was just doing the math. That's over $6 million for a 100-unit apartment building. That would be basically taxpayers, your taxpayer money, paying the developer to do. Is that something that our constituents want? That's up for debate.
So if the votes aren't there based on the views of the other city council members and their opposition to some of the changes, what do you foresee some of the amendments looking like? Like, where do you think that there could be compromise and where this could ultimately land, where there might be more agreement to allow a compromise to move forward?
Well, the biggest debate is parking, as I mentioned. right? That upsets the neighbors. So maybe we could provide on off-street parking. One of the ideas that was floated recently was having a resident manager at the site, just in case there's anything unruly going on. But then the subsidies, right? How much is the right amount to subsidize these developers who are building this? You know, it seems like $62,500 is an awful lot. And, but we'll see.
There's so many questions here, and they kind of, I want to just read a couple because they kind of all strike the same
Sure.
same tone. Erica writing in, I'm a parent with young kids. We live with my parents. We're in Kaimuki. We want to find a place of our own. We're fine with renting, but we have a really hard time even finding anything to put a bid out for. That's from Erica in Kaimuki. There's another person here writing in, I work in town. I commute from the west side every day. I want to move in town, but I never qualify. Everything's built in the 1960s or 70s. I make too much to qualify for the new affordable units, but there's no newer apartments in town. How long do I have to wait until I can move closer to town? And on and on. There's actually quite a few more. But, you know, to this viewer and to Erica, I mean, what do you say to folks? Because we hear a lot of numbers, right? That there's all this housing in the pipeline, and somehow I don't see it materializing. And for these folks, they can't seem to find a unit to rent.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I understand what you're talking about. We call that the gap group, right? People making between 80 and 120% of the area median income, right? We're building, and we have lots of subsidies if you're building at 60% AMI and below. And of course, market rate, you know, there's a lot of market rate units out there, but really that gap group, what do we do there? You know, we dedicate about $8 million per year from your taxpayer dollars into this affordable housing fund. But that is for 60% AMI and below. I think we got to start getting creative and think about these incentives for developers who are building at that gap group. And by the way, a lot of these Bill 7 homes are for 100% AMI, right? But yeah, I mean, really, that's why I come back to Bill 11. Bill 11 is looking at all the incentives on the table, and let's figure out what works. There's a really great study done by UHero on housing, and they've updated it a few times, and they talk about exactly what your caller just talked about. That gap group. Like, there's a lot of people in her situation that need help. So, again, looking at Bill 11, trying to figure out what incentives work, and maybe shift money where they work.
How do you think the council can be more proactive in seeking out some of these projects? Because when you're looking at the history of some of these developments and some of these projects that are moving forward, they're really being spearheaded by the developers themselves who see an incentive or who see a reason to kind of move forward on this and want to pursue something like this. But is there anything that the city council can do on their end to be a little more proactive to incentivize and try to go after some of these developers or to develop plans for TOD projects or anything else that might help to add inventory to the overall market?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. In fact, I belong to this cohort with the National Association of Counties. By the way, this affordable housing problem is not unique to us in Honolulu. It's actually happening all over the country. And I was amazed to hear that. But Miami-Dade, as an example, we had a cohort, and they were teaching us that, hey, you take city-owned properties, right? Turn it over to a developer for 99 years, right, at $1 a year, with all those other incentives. But we just tell the developer, okay, we want you to build for that gap group. So recently I asked the Department of Housing and Land Management for an update on all the city-owned properties. I was actually very, very surprised to hear that we don't have that. Can you imagine? We don't have a list of all city-owned properties. It's in the charter, by the way. The Department of Land Management must do that. It's in the charter. So I've kind of been asking a lot. Lately, I've been demanding, like, really, we need an update. That's ridiculous that we don't have it. But here's the idea. Take these properties, give it over to a developer. You got the free land. Now, what I'm hearing is the land is one piece. We actually need to provide other incentives. But as an example, right now we have a piece of land on the LOI at the very end near the Kalakaua Bridge, where we actually had to foreclose on it because there's a lot of drugs and prostitution and bad things happening. We just knocked it down, put out an RFP, someone got the contract, and they're going to be building affordable housing there, right? But to me, that's the best way to go, right? We already have a recipe. We could look at what other cities do. In fact, Dade County in Florida, the city makes money off of this, but you got to mix affordables with market rate and then put businesses on the bottom, right? So, great question. Thank you.
It's pretty stunning to think that there is no inventory of city-owned properties. How can that be?
Right? Yeah. But they're working on it. I'm happy to say that they're working on it. We have a new data specialist that, by the way, I created that position. We have a data specialist in the city who's going to be working on that and putting it on the computer so it's easily searchable.
Okay, so this would be one idea that you could actually give the land itself to a developer for a certain amount of time, and then that way that cost is out of the equation. Mm-hmm. How successful do you think that could be? Have you seen other municipalities do that well?
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, you mix the affordables with market rate and business, and actually cities have actually made money where they charge rent. But for us at this point, because everything's so much more expensive here, all the materials are so much more expensive because you got to ship them in. We'll start with free. We give you the land for free.
When you look at this bill particularly, there is obviously from the feedback that we're seeing here, you see it on the council with some very passionate opposition and support for these various measures. And I just wanted to get your pulse on where things stand with your fellow council members right now, because this has become at times a divisive issue where there's such strong opinions. How are things in the overall working relationship with members, and your colleagues there? And how do you navigate that, being the chair and having to lead this group when there are clearly some different opinions on how things should proceed moving forward?
Actually, I think we probably are one of the most proactive housing supporters in recent history. And we've been working pretty well together on that. I think since I've been the chair, we've probably, since I've been on the council, we've probably only denied one. Remember in Kailua, they were trying to build a building on Oneava Street. I was a council member. I wasn't the chair at the time, but that was the only one I think we've ever said no to. We've approved every single one that comes across our desk. It's interesting. The legislature passed the bill saying that we have less control over what these developers do on 201H projects. And that's unfortunate because oftentimes we would hold the developers a little bit more accountable and ask them to build more affordable. Say if they came in and they wanted to build, 25 units affordable, we say, well, can you squeeze 5 more, build 30 affordable? Stuff like that. Under state law, we're not allowed to do that anymore. It's just an up or down vote on 201H projects.
I'm curious, so where do we sort of land on this? Because I know we want to talk to you about a few other things too, but it sounds like, and for those who follow this closely, that Bill 17 is likely not going to make it through. Is that your read?
That's my read.
Okay.
Although the Sunshine Law says we can't talk about it amongst ourselves. It really has to happen outside. But what I do is I pay attention, and I hope everybody else pays attention at the hearings when people comment, council members comment on these bills. That's just my take.
Okay. And sort of more broadly to Ryan's question as well, how do you measure success in this area? Because it feels like there will never be enough affordable housing. How do we know that we're actually making some gains so that, the people writing in are not saying, well, I've got to choose between living here and living on the continent?
Yeah, again, I now I sound like a broken record, but Bill 11 simply asked the Department of Housing and Land Management to quantify these incentives so we can figure out what's working.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the other issues. And one of the other issues kind of related to this is homelessness and what we're seeing, and especially in the district that you represent in Waikiki, in the urban core area. How do you think the city is doing in making progress in some of these areas? We've seen at times where now we're seeing homeless more into the other communities that maybe never saw homeless before. Where do you think things stand right now? Do you think that you're in a good spot? And how do you see there is room for improvement moving forward?
Well, you started off talking about Waikiki, and I have to say the good news is that homelessness and crime in Waikiki has gone down, which is great. We started this project called Safe and Sound with the prosecutor's office, where we had geographic restrictions. If you get caught and convicted of a crime in Waikiki, you can't come back. It's similar to Weed and Seed, but we call it Safe and Sound in Waikiki. So that's been successful. But interestingly, we've noticed an uptick in homelessness outside of Waikiki because now you can't stay in Waikiki, you got to move out. So we have a new director of homelessness, Mr. Miyahiro, and the guy is pretty good, right? He's doing a lot more of these, I hate to call them sweeps, right? But especially on Diamond Head, where we had hundreds of people living on the slopes of Diamond Head. But he's going in there, moving people out, but providing services. Even on one occasion, provide showers and medical care. And then also, one of the things we're doing is putting a doctor out there who can prescribe antipsychotic medication, right? Because we know the people who are still homeless usually are chronic drug users or alcohol abusers and or have mental illness. And these guys are self-medicating using drugs and alcohol. So we need to get these guys the help that they need and get on the right medication. Antipsychotic medication is phenomenal. It works. So we want to put a doctor out there to help actually administer the medication right there on the spot. Right there on the spot. Now, this medication usually takes a while. But one of the things the state can do, if I can say, right, Hawaii State Hospital and the Kekela ward, right, we need more bed space for these people to get the help that they need. Because even with the antipsychotic medication, there's some pretty serious side effects. You got to be able to have someone, basically living there so that you can monitor the side effects and adjust the dose. And once you get healthy, you can live a law-abiding life and get a job. And, well, it comes back to paying the rent again, right? How are you going to get a job that pays enough to pay the rent? But as far as homelessness is concerned, that's what the city is doing right now.
Yeah, and that has to be pretty frustrating because if you have these tools in place where you can now deliver these medications, you obviously need that state partner then to say, okay, and I'll receive this patient. What are your conversations like? Because I know that the city has its homeless coordinator. The state now has Jun Yang as its homeless coordinator, and he's done a lot of work with the city in the past, of course. I mean, do you feel like the state and the city are working in coordination on this? I do. And if you look at the top, right, the mayor and the governor actually have a really good relationship, and they've, unlike other administrations where they didn't get along, I got to say, I'm really impressed that they are working together. And my understanding is that the two homeless directors are actually working together as well.
I want to also talk more specifically about Waikiki, not only because it's your district, but also because it is a major part and player within our tourism industry. And we have heard from tourism officials who have come on this program who are worried about where things are looking, projections, and just the softer spend by some of the tourists and those downturn in numbers. With Waikiki being such an important part of your district and a place where many people are employed, what are your thoughts on the tourism industry as a whole, and how do you see it being supported by locals, or if the city can do anything to help what is projected to be a slow tourism season?
Another really good question. So what the city can do is ensure that you have a clean, safe environment, right? So we have, working with the Waikiki Business Improvement District, we have these ambassadors out there on the street. And they are wonderful. They're wonderful. These guys are out there not only power washing the sidewalks, but now they're actually, if a crime is taking place, they're going to come in and help and perhaps be a witness. Oftentimes, if you don't have someone who's willing to come to court and testify, the case goes away. Here, the ambassador can go in and testify. At least that's what we're working towards. And then making sure we have enough police officers in Waikiki. Because if it's not safe, tourists aren't going to come. But I really look at that being the city's role. We have the Department of Business and Economic Development, chaired by director on the state side. But the city's role, I really think, is making sure it's clean and safe.
To that end, Keone here writing in, anything you can do about that derelict property on Kuhio Avenue owned by the Kosasa folks from ABC Stores. Civil Beat has covered this extensively. We know that this is an investment that then has not been redeveloped in the way that was initially planned. What are your thoughts about that property? Yeah,
I would love to see that property redeveloped. And in fact, I met with Paul Kosasa, the owner of ABC Stores, and he came to my office. We had a really good conversation, and he is working on it. I guess at this point, my understanding is he's been having problems with DPP, Department of Permitting and Planning, to get his permits to do exactly what we've been talking about. And there may be an issue with setbacks, but he is working on it, and I'm keeping abreast of it, and hopefully we can find a solution.
Another area, and I'm sorry, we're kind of jumping all over the place because there are so many issues. But I want to talk about law enforcement and HPD and what we're seeing on a national level, of course, with immigration enforcement and with ICE being involved in many communities. We haven't seen that level here in Honolulu. But I wanted to raise the question of the role that local law enforcement, HPD, plays in integrating with such federal agents and potentially immigration officials like ICE. Where do you think the HPD should draw the line in terms of their collaboration with ICE, and how do you plan moving forward should that, what we see on a national level come here to shores here in Honolulu?
So last week in the Public Safety Committee, we had a hearing on the use of masks. And I did research, and I was going to introduce a bill prohibiting the use of masks from our law enforcement. And in my research, it turns out that HPD has a rule on the books already that prohibits the use of masks and face coverings, with exceptions, right? So I drafted a resolution actually thanking the police department for this rule. And Chief Anna came and testified, and we got to flesh it out a little bit more. It turns out that other jurisdictions have had a similar ban where legislatures or city councils tried to ban face coverings. It turned out we were preempted by the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution, and it was thrown out of court. But we in Hawaii have a rule already with HPD saying we don't wear masks, and they have to identify themselves when asked. Officer, what's your name? I'm such and such, right? Which is good. But the question came up from one of the council members, like, are you going to assist ICE if they were to come down here and do what they're doing in Minnesota? And Chief Anik was very candid. He said, we have a huge shortage of officers. We don't have the ability to help, right? I'm sure they're going to cooperate as much as possible. But the fact of the matter is, we got to keep our citizens safe. So I don't feel as worried as other jurisdictions right now, but I think we got to be aware and mindful in case it does happen.
Yeah, and the face coverings that you're talking about, that's of course limited to HPD officers. We can't then say that applies to the federal agents that are coming in, but our own officers are not allowed to be wearing face coverings and do have to identify themselves.
Correct.
I want to ask you about the Charter Commission, because we will be speaking with Jacob Aki after this about the Honolulu City Charter, which is sort of like a politically nerdy kind of thing, but since we're such political junkies, it's right up our alley. And it is really interesting because it is a way for the citizenry to really engage and have influence. What are your thoughts about the changes that the charter might need? So just by way of background, the charter actually calls for an update every 10 years. Think about this. On the state side, they have the Constitutional Convention, supposed to happen every 10 years. It hasn't happened since 1978. But guess what? The city, we're not scared. We're doing it. And I got to thank the all-volunteer, non-paid commissioners who are out in the community at numerous community meetings trying to get people to participate. And I think they got something like 295 possible charter amendments. So that's a lot of work for the commission to actually go through and figure out. And the community is really, really participating, which is fantastic. Yeah.
I want to ask you about your political future. The last time I think we spoke was on this program where you announced that you would be seeking a third term because of the way in which you came into office and some challenges and legal challenges that actually now you say allowed you this third term. Just your thoughts about making that announcement, heading back into this re-election cycle, any pushback you've heard, and just how things are going for you as a candidate once again to represent this district.
Yeah, so far so good. I've started walking door to door. I've knocked on doors in Hahaioni Valley, in Hawaii Kai, and in Port Locke, and we're going out to Kahala this Friday. and this weekend. And I got to tell you, I really, really, really enjoy walking door to door. You get to know your neighbors, you get to know the issues and what's important to people. And so far, the feedback's been really, really good. Technically, it would be my second term, actually, not a third term. But and I think the critical part is that it was actually Mike Formby, the managing director, who actually served as an interim council member. So I didn't get my full 4-year terms. And the charter is pretty clear, 2 consecutive 4-year terms. And I didn't have that benefit. And actually, most pivotal part is that 6 months that I was not in office when Mike Formby was there, the budget process goes through there. So I didn't get to represent my constituents during that time. But as we mentioned, I'm going to pull papers probably this week and get the requisite amount of signatures, and hopefully my name's on the ballot.
Yeah, and when you look back, at the time that you've spent, what makes you want to continue on? Because I can imagine that in this role, people have a lot of things to say, and they're not always good, and you probably can't go get a meal without someone stopping you and say, hey, Tommy, can you work on this for me, whatever this is. So what makes you want to continue in this work?
Well, let me just follow up on that. So my kids won't even go into the supermarket with me. They just refuse, because I also often get stopped to talk about issues. But that's what I love about the job. Really, I am a representative. You guys are my boss. And when we actually get stuff done, it's the best feeling in the world. It really, really is, right? When we see the fruit of our labor, I got to tell you, it just makes you come back for more and more and more. And again, like you mentioned, we've had some differences on the council, but for the most part, we get along with each other, and we've been able to work together, and we passed just about everything 9-0. There's very few, except for like the bus fare and others things, but we get along pretty good. And like I said, it's really, really great to actually see the fruit of your labor.
Well, that's glad to hear, because you guys work in pretty close confines. If you've ever been to the, down there to Honolulu Hale, everyone's kind of working in the same office. So it would be really awkward if you, had some disagreements as often as we see in some other branches of government. So that's always good news to hear.
Well, it's great to have you. Thank you for making time for us today. We're going to be catching up with chair, or not chair, but the charter representative, Jacob Aki, right after this, to dive in more about what the charter commissioners are looking at and how you can get involved. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome back to Spotlight Now. We want to thank all of you for sending in your questions. Again, if you have questions for our guests, you can email them here to spotlightnow@hawaiinewsnow.com. In fact, we had so many questions that we weren't able to get to that we are actually going to be passing them along to Chair Waters.
Yeah, we'll pass them on directly to him, and hopefully he will get back to you with his staff. We want to move now to Jacob Aki, who's a charter commissioner. Honolulu City Council the city basically has a rule, as the chair noted there, every 10 years we get to revisit the charter.
Yeah.
Tell us about this process and why you decided to get involved as a commissioner.
Yeah, I mean, as was shared, this is a very unique opportunity. Every 10 years, the city has to take a look at the charter. And as you folks know, a lot of our governing documents were written decades ago. And I think the uniqueness of this process is it allows our charter to be updated every 10 years to really reflect what's going on, to reflect the issues that are impacting the city, but more importantly, to have these conversations about how the city should be operating. As folks know, the Honolulu City Charter is the city's governing document. It is a city's constitution, so it sets all of the framework of how the city operates, how funds should be spent. So we've worked really hard to really look at what the past charter commissions have done, and to really look at how we want to make this process not just go as smooth as it can, but how can we get the most people engaged? Because at the end of the day, as you folks shared, this is kind of a process for a lot of these political nerds. And I got involved because, I am a student of government. I spent a lot of my career working in government. But really, it's an opportunity to use the experience and the knowledge that I was able to gain to really help make this entire city better.
So let's talk through that process of what actually is possible when you have these community meetings, when you get these engagements, when you get suggestions.
Yeah.
How does that process work when you go to say a community like on the North Shore, they suggest something, and how does that ultimately get decided that this is something that you're going to consider and then thus implement it into the charter moving forward?
Yeah, so last fall we did I think nearly a dozen community meetings all across the entire county. We went to the west side, we went to the North Shore, and really the main purpose was to educate people about what this is. This is a process that happens once every 10 years. So we do have to re-educate folks about what the city charter is, and what it's meant to do. But more importantly, we were also there to encourage people to not just share with us what are their concerns, but to encourage them to submit proposals, and to really tell us how they think the charter can be changed for the betterment of this entire county. So those meetings went great. Obviously when we went to the North Shore, there were issues that they shared that were specific to that district. When we went to the west side, right? So every community had their kind of set issues that they really wanted to see changed. But that provided us good idea of what are the proposals that are going to come. This was a record-breaking year. We had over 200 proposals. I think we had a 294, and to date we've received over 400 pieces of testimony, and we're still going through those. So we have about 50, I think, that we have to take a look at our next meeting before we go to the next process. But what we also did, and what I think this Charter Commission did a really great job of doing, is trying to remove barriers that prevented people from engaging in this process. This is a citizens process, and everybody's voice should be reflected in our city charter. But what prevented a lot of people from engaging previously was things like it was a complicated form. The proposals needed to be in Ramsar format. It needed to have certain, legal frameworks and that sort of thing. What we said was, hey, we're going to make this as easy as possible. Give us your ideas. So the staff did a great job of putting together a public form. It was a Google form that was on our website. It asked questions about, what changes do you want to make? What do you want to add? And we didn't require them to format it in any particular way. So what we're doing, and the charter commissioners are doing the hard work, but the Charter Commission staff is also doing the hard work of taking all of that in. And then as we move forward, we're going to be the ones to try to work that language in.
So you take an idea. I'm a citizen. Let's say, I live downtown.
Yeah.
And I say, I want this change to the charter.
Yeah.
I've submitted my idea.
Yeah.
You're then working with your staff to actually formulate that perhaps into some kind of language
that
is legally...
obviously we got a lot of different proposals, but what we're doing is, obviously we are asking folks to provide as much information as they can. If you have a proposed language change, to share that. What we've done is we've actually grouped them into different buckets because, as you folks might know, there's a lot of heated topics that we're going to have to deal with relating to the police commission, right? So there were numerous topics that many different people actually asked us to take a look at. But what we've done is we've grouped them, and then we've said, okay, this idea, there's 7 proposals for the police commission. 6 of them are saying the same thing. We think we're going to move this vehicle forward. So what we're telling folks is your idea is going to move forward. Your actual proposal, the actual vehicle might not be, but the idea is what we want to move forward. So we've gone through that. We've gone through the different topics. We've gone through the first round of kind of looking at all of these different things, and then the next process is when we're actually going to have to start to dig in deep and to try to figure out what that language is going to be.
So beyond just the feedback that you're getting from the community, how much of what has happened in the past, whether it be issues or topics that have come up, is that being taken into consideration? So say, for example, pay raises for city employees, or when you're talking about like the police commission, their oversight, what they can do, how much of that do you folks take into consideration, and who maybe spearheads some of the other issues that we've seen in the past that have come up that have cited the charter and as the body, as the entity and the driver for why these decisions are made? Is there someone that goes and looks back at some of the issues? How does that work?
I really want to give a huge amount of kudos to our staff, because our staff there are 4 of them, and they've done a great job of really looking at what each charter commission has done. At the end of every charter commission, there is a report that you have to submit, that kind of highlights how the process went, what are some recommendations. So our staff has actually gone back and looked at each of these reports, looked at what issues came up, looked at previous meeting minutes, to really provide us the context as we start to debate or as we start to look at these different issues. The city's Corp Council has also been a great resource. Many of them have worked on previous charter commissions. So just having that institutional knowledge, I think, has also been key. But it's also for us as individual charter commission members, going back and doing our own research, kind of looking at what issues have come up. We've seen some of the same issues come up charter commission after charter commission. Things like term limits, things like the neighborhood board, things like how property tax revenue should be spent, right? So we've had an idea of what are some of the reoccurring issues, so we've kind of taken a look at that as well.
I'm interested, is there anything in there that sort of surprised you, or anything that you think, if you can give us a preview about what you think is going to be up for voters? Because that's the other piece that people need to understand, is that you then take this idea, you turn it into language, and then the voters actually get to vote on those ideas at the end.
One of the cool things that we've done is we've actually also looked at what have some of the other counties have done. I know the Maui Charter Commission convened a couple of years ago, and one of the great things that came out of their charter commission, their voters ultimately approved, was the creation of the Department of OEV Resource and Cultural Stewardship, which is a department within Maui County that really looks at how is land being managed, how are native resources being managed. And we've actually had several proposals that were brought to us, and that's actually one of the things that we're going to be moving forward and really taking a look at, of how can the city play a role in the management of our natural resources, but more importantly, how can the city play a role in really stewarding and shepherding not just our natural resources, but really our cultural way of living, and how do we bring a indigenous perspective to the work that we all are doing, right? So that's one I think folks are going to see. Another proposal that received a lot of positive feedback was a proposal to use a certain percentage of property tax revenue to create a food security fund. Obviously, what we've gone around to all of these different communities and that we've heard is that food security is a major issue, and that many of our students get their only meal of the day when they go to school, and how can the city play a role with its limited resources to ensure that food security is a priority. So that proposal got a lot of positive feedback. We're going to be taking a look at that. And obviously, I think things like the police commission, the mayor's authority to either fire or hire the police chief, that's probably going to be a very contentious one, but one that we actually recently at our last meeting saw several different proposals for. So, we'll definitely move that forward to see how that goes. But I think overall what we are looking at is how can these proposals not just make sense of what goes into a city charter, but how can it improve the quality of life for, all of our residents.
And to that point, what can be done to maybe make, when it ultimately ends up on the ballot and it goes to the voters, what can be done to make it easier to understand? Because we have heard from voters, standing in line and people who go to the ballot box, read these amendments and have no idea what language it's in, because it is, there's a lot of legal jargon in there. Beyond just education, is there anything that can be done to help make it plain and simple for voters to understand, or education that can be done so that they know exactly what they're voting on?
That's actually, one of our main goals is once we figure out what proposals are going to go to the voter base, is really trying to make sure that we frame it in a way that's easy for them to understand. Because I think in 2016, the last time we had this, there were, I think, 15 or 17 proposals, and because it has to be in its entirety, the ballot's pretty long. So trying to figure out how can we, message it and frame it in a way that's easy to understand. But what we've also prioritized as a body is making sure that we can get through this process pretty quickly, so that we have as much time as we can to educate people, because our work doesn't end once we figure out, what's going to go on, on the ballot. It's going to be our job to then take it to the public and to educate them about what these proposals mean. Why did we choose to put them on the ballot, and how is it going to improve not just how government is run, but how these proposals may improve quality of life. So there's a whole education campaign similar to what we did earlier of going out to the different communities to kind of get their thoughts and to educate them. We're going to have a similar process of going back out into the community to share this is what's going to be voted on November 3rd, and try to get as much engagement as we can on that. But we're also encouraging folks to actually come to the Charter Commission meetings. It's streamed live. Folks can participate not just in person, but participate virtually, and to really follow along. And if you want to make a comment, you want your voice to be heard, there is a process for that.
Yeah, I mean, what's so exciting about this to me is that this is really direct access to impact government, right? And people often complain, and we know that Hawaii has historically very low voter turnout, and people feel like they're not being represented. This is your opportunity to actually influence the way the city is run, right? And what a gift.
I mean, I tell people this is the most important governing document that the city has, right? So it is a framework in which everything runs. So to have an opportunity every 10 years to actually open it up and say what changes need to be made, what things can be worked on is really exciting. But as I shared from the get-go, every single one of our commission members really made it a point to ensure that throughout this process that we make it as easy as possible. Make it as easy for the single mother who's working 2 jobs to really be engaged in this process, or for that kupuna who really wants to ensure that the city is doing its best job to provide quality of life for their mo'opuna, right? So making it as easy as possible has been our goal, and I want to say that we've done a pretty good job at doing that.
And I wonder what is the conversation like with council members themselves? Because I imagine when you go out to these meetings, there are obviously going to be some suggestions that are more policy driven than it is based on a charter amendment, and it could be just an issue that they have in their community that you're not going to change the entire charter for just this issue. Do those issues then get passed along to these representatives in their community? How is that conversation and relationship with those representatives that are actually responsible for some of the issues and policy changes needed in these communities?
So one of the things that I always tell people is the hard thing about our job is really saying no, because there's been so many great ideas, so many great proposals that have been brought forth, but most of them aren't they aren't meant to be in the city charter. And what I tell people is that the city charter, or the charter document isn't meant to legislate policy, right? We're not trying to legislate any particular action. We're just trying to provide a overall framework. But many of the proposals that we've gotten, like, there was a auntie from Nanakuli who wanted free bus, right? So they submitted a proposal, and we all said, this is a great idea. It's not meant to be in the city charter, but we are forwarding these. Our staff are taking note and passing these along to the city council or to the different city agencies to say, hey, this might not fit in our charter, but this is a concern that we heard. We want to pass it along, and how can you hopefully address it within whatever jurisdiction you folks have? So Yeah.
So we know the ballots go out, the vote is November 3rd.
Yeah.
We're now in February. What happens between now and then? What are some key dates or things that
Yeah,
people need
so
to pay attention to?
yeah, so over the next 3 months, we're gonna be really honing down on narrowing which proposals are going to go forth. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of debate, but we are meeting about every 2 weeks, and I think as we get closer to the spring, we may be meeting every week to make sure that we stick to our timeline, because there's a lot of work that has to be done. Our goal is to wrap up our deliberations by late May, early June, and then the work goes of making sure that it's ballot ready. It needs to be translated into several different languages. There are reporting notices that need to go out into the newspaper, and then that whole education process. So we are planning to wrap everything up in terms of getting the final language by early summer, and then from summer to the general election is really going out there to educate people. Ballots are going to be delivered during the general election probably in October, and then the general election is on November 3rd. So we'll see how this whole process pans out.
A lot of work.
There it is. And so if people are watching here, this is the first time they're hearing of it. Is there still opportunities to provide any suggestions?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about the Charter Commission is, every commission really dictates how they operate. So, we had to create our own rules, our own standing rules. And while the public submission deadline was back in November, individual charter members still have an opportunity to introduce something new. So if there are things that you think we're missing, if there are issues that you want to weigh in on, please tune in. We have to notice our meetings at least a week before, so you can definitely follow along. Please come, reach out to our staff. Our staff has been very responsive and actually helped several community members draft and put their proposals forth, but to come and to testify and to really make your voice heard. We really want to hear from everybody, and we've had some pretty long meetings because we've gotten a lot of testimony. So we're really encouraged by the amount of participation we're seeing. But to visit our website, HonoluluCharterCommission.com. We have an Instagram page as well. But to just stay tuned and to attend our meetings, and if you see us out there in the public, please do talk to us, because we're really excited about this work.
It's tremendous to me because it is such a labor of love. I mean, I just last question, you're putting so much of your time and energy into this. This is an all volunteer group who is doing a lot of due diligence and a lot of work. What keeps you going and really committed to this process?
Yeah, I think, as I shared, this is really an opportunity to have a big impact on how the city is going to be operating for the next 10 years. And, as a father of two, it's really become my purpose to make sure that, I leave behind a city and a state that my children can not just grow up in, but also thrive in. So the city has a wide-ranging impact, and a lot of the issues that most people care about, whether it's your rubbish, whether it's your sewer, whether it's your water, that's a city issue. So the city has a lot of touch points in how it affects everybody's lives, and to really have a role and to really have a participation in how the most important governing document is framed and how it's being written is really exciting for me. And this is where my political nerd comes out, because you don't get to do this very often. And I think as was shared, the last time we had a state con was in 1978. So to open the city charter, that's really exciting. But I think it also shows people that these governing documents are living documents, and that they are meant to be updated to match what's going on in the current times. So we have to make sure that our governing documents, our policies, our laws are reflective of what's going on currently. So that's what keeps me going, is that it's exciting work, and we have a great commission. I mean, the commission members have been so great to work with. We have an awesome chair. So ultimately, it's just a fun exercise.
Well, we appreciate you being here today and all the work that you're doing for the city.
Yeah,
so
thank you
you
guys.
so much. Thank you for being with us. We'll be right back after this.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live. We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
First alert traffic is like always having a helpful passenger right next to you.
There's a crash up ahead in the left lane.
When we see a backup, we'll tell you live on TV.
That doesn't look too good.
And send an alert to your phone.
I'll type, you drive.
First alert traffic on TV, streaming, and on the Hawaii News Now app.
Keeping you and your ohana safe.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, we want to thank both of our guests for joining us today. We started the conversation out with Chair Tommy Waters, and there was a lot of discussion, obviously, around housing and what's happening there with some of the amendments and changes that are going forth. And interesting enough, Chair Waters recognizing the pushback that is being received, not only amongst members within the Honolulu City Council, but through the constituents and community, and saying, some of these changes might not happen after all.
Yeah, him saying effectively that Bill 17 is not going to pass by his read on what's happening. And also, thank you to all of you who wrote in today. It's always wonderful to have a robust discussion online, and so many of you writing in your personal testimony as to why you need affordable housing, and we know that that is the number one issue in all politics here in Hawaii. So it was great to hear from him directly. Also talking about some of the challenges in Waikiki when it comes to homelessness, and really trying to explain why he voted to raise the bus fare.
Yeah, and really something that he's advocating for is advertisement within some of these public transportation spaces like the bus and Skyline. We'll see what happens. There has been traditionally pushback on those types of measures in the past. We'll see if he has the political power to kind of push this through. And then also great to hear from Jacob Aki and really what's happening with this commission, and an opportunity for viewers and for the general public to really engage in some of the decisions moving forward on what the charter looks like here in the city and county of Honolulu.
Yeah, ahead of the show, I did have a chance to go on that website. I encourage you to do it too, because you can see the almost 300 pieces of testimony that people have submitted, all kinds of ideas. And as he said, a lot of it focusing in on the police in particular, and whether, what authority the mayor should have. We expect that to be on there. Jacob's going to come back probably sometime later in the summer to tell us what the commission has settled on and kind of help to explain, because we do know, as you noted, sometimes when you're voting, you have no idea what you're voting on.
Yes means voting no. It can get very confusing. So we hope to get him back on here. Join us next week, where we're going to be focusing on the University of Hawaii. We'll start a conversation speaking with Athletic Director Matt Elliott about his budget proposal in front of the legislature and asking for more money for NIL athletes.
Yeah, and we'll see you right back here Tuesday on Spotlight Now. See you then.